Now, the Dover trial, like a lot of arguments about evolution, also involved fossils. And one of the things that you will hear from critics of evolution is that there are no intermediate forms, no transitional forms in the fossil record. A couple of years ago, the National Academy of Sciences tried to put that argument to rest. They said, look, there's so many intermediate forms between fish and amphibians and reptiles, reptiles and mammals, even along the primate line, that you often can't tell where the transition occurs from one species to another. That's the very definition of transitional form. But in the Dover trial, we didn't want to argue from quotations. We wanted to show data. And I want to show you something that Kevin Padian, one of our expert witnesses from Berkeley, good things come out of Berkeley too, brought into the trial. This is the Intelligent Design textbook, Pandas and People, and this is part of a page of pandas. And what it shows is a lobe-finned fish from the Devonian period in ancient history called Eusthenopteron, and Ichthyostega, one of the very first amphibians. And they put them side by side, and they simply describe the fossil record as filled with unbridgeable gaps. In other words, evolutionary biologists are so stupid as to believe that somehow this changed into that. And that's an evolutionary explanation for land vertebrates. Here is another diagram from the book showing basically the fin of Eusthenopteron and the front limb of Ichthyostega. And it in effect says, kids, can you believe they actually think this changed into that? And they write, how many different transitional species were required to bridge this gap? We don't know. But we do know that no such transitional species have ever been recovered. Wow, pretty powerful stuff. Now, what have they actually done? What they've done is on the transition from fish to land vertebrates, they've picked up two examples, Eusthenopteron and Ichthyostega, and they say, you know, no transitional species have been recovered. Evolution has an unbridgeable gap. Now, what have they done with respect to what we really know about this transition? The answer is they've ignored most of it. If you actually look at what we know about this transition, they've picked up two species, ignored two transitional forms, Acanthostega and Panderichthys, and pretended these are the only ones that are there. So in effect, this statement is bogus. The reality is this so-called gap is actually part of a very well understood evolutionary transition in which we can actually trace the development of the tetrapod limb all the way through. But it gets better than that. Let's look very closely at just one part of this transition. The part that starts out with Eusthenopteron, then goes to Panderichthys and Acanthostega. And in particular, let's ask the critical question. These animals are fish that are very, very amphibian-like, but they're still fish. This is an amphibian that is very fish-like, but it's still an amphibian. Can we find a transitional form at the exact fish-to-amphibian transition that has all the transitional characters we would expect? And I want to show you the story of one of the scientists who sought and found this transitional form.